Okay, we are moving on to lesson 9, and this is the first part of this for comparing and rounding decimals. Over the course of this lesson, we will be doing both of those. First comparing, and then ultimately next week doing rounding the decimals. So let's start with a warm up. Okay, so let's compare each pair of numbers using the greater than, less than, or equal signs. So you've already done this type of stuff before. So this is just to kind of give you a refresher on how this works and how we kind of say these things out loud. So let's start with 238 and 234. So we know that this symbol. So, and I'm not treating you guys like little kids, but I even as an adult, look at these symbols and think of it like a mouth, like an alligator, a Pac-Man, or a monster eating up the bigger of the two. So the bigger number between these two is 238, but there is a certain way to say it. So this, how we say this is 238 is greater than 234. So there is a certain way to say this. So we'll work on that. Let me switch colors. 412 and 412. That's pretty simple. 412 is equal to 412. So again, what I'm trying to teach you in fifth grade math is some of the proper ways to say these things mathematically. So as you get to be older middle school and high school students, a lot of these things make sense. And let's try 12 and 108. All right. So the bigger number is 108. So I make the mouth eat the bigger one. So you read these statements or these comparisons like you would a sentence from left to right. So I would read 12 is less than 108. So again, there is a proper way to say these aloud. That's why it has this warm up do that for it. Okay, so let's get started with the lesson. Turn to page 167. And let's take a look at our first question here. Okay, Grace chooses one red and one blue button from her button collection. The blue button is 1.2 centimeters wide, and the red button is 1.08 centimeters wide. Which button is wider? So let's do in the space below, let's do a place value chart. Okay, so this is our ones, this is our tenths, this is our hundreds. Okay, so let's see, blue button, B for blue, and I'll write it in blue, is 1.2 centimeters. Our red button is 1.08. So we would say the blue is 1 and 2 tenths. Our red one is 1 and 8 hundredths. So they want to know which one's bigger. So there are a couple different ways. And again, it's called comparison. So let's compare. Our two ones in the one column are the same. So we move on to the next column and compare these. And we know 2 is bigger than a 0. So which button is wider? It is the blue button. And if we want to get really technical, we can say the blue button's wider because it's 2 tenths bigger than the red button. But I just do it like a contest, almost like you have a battle in the ones column and they tie, so they move on to the tenths column and see who wins. Well, the blue one does because there's a 0 there for that. And we totally disregard this over here. Even though we know an 8 is bigger than a 2, they're in a different place value column, so it doesn't really matter because 8 hundredths is much smaller than 2 tenths. All right, so go ahead and turn the page, and we will look at question 1 up there at the top. And we already answered this, but which button is wider? It's the blue one. And use a greater than symbol or less than symbol to write an inequality statement that compares the widths of the red and blue buttons. Grace chose from her collection. So all that fancy talk there is basically just to say 1.2 is greater than 1.08, or 1 and 2 tenths is greater than 1 and 8 hundredths. So inequality statements, you'll get into more when you are in 6th grade math. But I do like how this program introduces you to the vocabulary. All right, let's look at question 2. Probably see this is a very short lesson today. You can use decimal comparisons to help you round decimals to a given place value. Rounding decimals is similar to rounding whole numbers. So for this part, we're going to go over just the basics of rounding, and you'll have a more detailed lesson on that in session 3. But let's go to part A here. A number line can be a useful tool for rounding. Place and label the numbers 1 and 3 tenths and 1 and 8 tenths on the number line below. So for this number line, it has a range of 1 and to 2. So here's 1, here's 1.1, 1.2, and this is 1 and 3 tenths. And we want to see 1 and 8 tenths on this line. So it's 1.1 and 5 tenths, 1 and 6 tenths, 1 and 7 tenths, 1 and 8 tenths. Okay. All right, let's go to B. What is 1 and 3 tenths rounded to the nearest whole number? So you literally can look on the number line and see that this is that far from the 1, and it's this far from the 2. So as far as rounding goes, the rule is whichever those two numbers is closest to is what it rounds to. So our 1.3 will round to 1, and that's because it's less than halfway between. And as you probably guess, we're going to have a certain situation when it is halfway, but we'll get to that in a moment. All right, what's 1.8 rounded to the nearest whole number? Well, 1.8 is this close to a 2, and 1.8 is this close to the 1. So it's obviously closer to the 2. And we would say that that is more than halfway between. But even with a number line, you can see visually that it would round up. All right, let's look at the middle here. We have 1 and 5 tenths. What is 1 and 5 tenths rounded to the nearest whole number? So here's a special situation. So it's going to round up to 2. So the rule is when exactly halfway, you round up. Big old exclamation point. Okay. So and that rule will apply for whole numbers and for decimals. Same rules apply for that. Will you have to do number line every time? Absolutely not. Just remember you can visually see it that way, but when you're rounding, you can use that rule. Okay. And last, how is rounding decimals like rounding whole numbers? So here's what I would write down for that. You round a number to the closest of two values. In the case of that last example, the two values were all the whole numbers 1 and 2. And when exactly halfway, you round up. And there's your general rules of rounding. Simple as that. Okay. And that's it for this lesson. clear that out. So your homework is IXL G12 compare decimal numbers. You'll basically be given um, two decimal numbers, and you have to use the greater than, less than, or equal symbols with them. And if you have any issues with that or any trouble, just contact me and I'll be happy to help you out.